panel. Let me bring in the independent environmental analyst and former BBC correspondent Roger Harrabin, Earth Systems scientist Thierry, and founder of consultancy firm ACAP Energy Anish Kapadia, and also energy economist Dr. Carol Nackley at the University of Surrey. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being with us. Roger Harrabin, maybe I could just start with you. I want to try and frame, before we get into energy policy, where we are. There's been so much this month in terms of the wildfires and the heat that we've witnessed around the world, but also various reports. So maybe you could sum up for us where we are at the end of July.
Well, the truth is that the world scientists get together on a regular basis to make pronouncements as to where they think the climate will be in years to come. Last week, we had an admission from Professor Sir Bob Watson, who is a former head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so a member of the climate royalty, you could say, certainly establishment, with him saying that actually, although they'd got the temperature forecast pretty much right, what they hadn't foreseen is the consequences that would flow from that. And he told me he thought that was extremely alarming. He talked to other scientists, and they are now saying, using the S word, scared. We are scared by what is happening because it's happening so very fast. And in response to this, governments don't appear to be reacting very much. And I'm trying to just sell one simple message, which is this. At the moment, we have had a temperature rise of about 1.2 Celsius. We are projected to go to 3 Celsius. Now, based on what we know now from 1.2 Celsius, who in our audience is going to put up their hand and say, oh, yeah, it's a really good idea to go to a 3 Celsius increase in global temperature and just see how we get on, or maybe we can adapt. My guess is that there will be very, very few people out there with their hands up, yet governments don't seem to have taken it that seriously and are moving on with policies that, frankly, are just far too slow.
Underpinning the politics, Dr. Nackley, at the moment is the cost to the taxpayer. Professor Jim Scare, he's the British professor who's just taken over as the new head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He said in his first interview this week, we need a just transition to ensure green measures retain public support. Before we talk about oil and gas, do you think we have a just transition at the moment?
Definitely not, because what is a just transition? Just transition means you bring everybody on board, and not only in the UK, but all around the world. And there's a clear divide between the rich world and the poorer countries, let alone in the UK, you do have the high income and the low income households. We saw what happened last year when in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and that fueled energy prices. Gas prices skyrocketed in the European continent. Oil prices also increased. There was a major outcry across Europe and in the UK where people were terrified by the increase in energy poverty. Nobody was talking really about climate change concerns last year, especially if you look at the average person in the street. In many parts of the world, they were concerned about high energy bills, and this is still a concern today. And we can talk later about this issue as well, that the energy transition also is going to be mining intensive. Who's going to drive the electric vehicles that require lithium for their batteries? It's not the poorer countries in Africa. It is the rich people in the developed countries that will use the minerals and the metals of the poorer countries. So there is a big view, a dominant view in the poorer countries that this is far from being a just energy transition. OK, let's start then with today's announcement, Anish. One of the things that the Prime Minister is saying is that in the mix of energy that the UK has, oil and gas still plays a prominent part. We all know what happened to the cost of living last year because of energy prices. So my question is, hundreds of new licences, does that necessarily guarantee that our energy prices will come down?
So I think the Prime Minister's got it correct in terms of what he's trying to do. By producing more oil, by producing more gas in this country, it doesn't mean that we're going to use more. It means that we're going to reduce the cost of the gas and the oil that we're using in this country. The cost of producing that, the revenues from that are going to go to the taxpayers. And we're going to create more security of supply as well for issues like we've seen last year with Russia. So I think the premise of what Rishi Sunak's trying to do makes a lot of sense. But I think we've had a disjointed energy policy for a number of years. The government is now granting licenses after imposing massive windfall taxes on companies last year, and continuing to impose those taxes after prices have retreated pretty dramatically. So even though these policies are coming into place that should supposedly lower oil and gas prices, I think the problem is that the investment climate that's been created by the government over the last few years, but over the last few decades as well, of constantly changing the terms, makes it very difficult for any oil company to want to invest in the UK.
Yeah, you're talking about the windfall taxes the government's imposed. I might come back to that, but I would just want to press you on one thing you said, that it will come back to the UK. Are you saying that the oil and gas which we drill now in the North Sea comes into the UK market? Because I thought it was part of a global wholesale market, and also it takes a certain amount of time for that to come online. So the question is, how quickly, and is this oil and gas that we are now signing licenses for, is that going to be used, or is there a danger that as we try and get to net zero, it becomes a sunk asset?
Well, the UK consumes significantly more energy than it can produce domestically, both on the oil side and the gas side. And what you've seen is that production has been declining for many years because of a lack of investment. Unlike other industries where you build a factory, you continue to produce at the same amount each year, oil and gas reservoirs decline each year, by as much as 10% per annum. So just to stay still, to be able to produce what we're producing at the moment, you need to continue to invest. Now, certainly that investment takes time. You grant a license, it takes a few years to explore, you hopefully find something, it takes another few years to actually bring that oil and gas on stream. So yeah, you're looking at maybe 5-10 years in terms of seeing an impact from this current round of licensing that's being issued. And then the debate is, well, 20, 25 years down the line, are you still going to need that oil and gas that's being produced? And in my view, yes, you will. There is going to be less demand, certainly for oil, maybe less so for gas over the next few decades. But there's certain things that you can't replace in the mix. There's certain things that you can't use or substitute for oil or for gas.
Erin, you were nodding at some points that you've heard. I'm just going to let you respond to what you've heard so far.
Yeah, well, I disagree with some of what was just said, actually, because it's quite clear, and the government have said themselves, that this will not bring down energy prices in the UK because, as you say, this is part of a wholesale market. It doesn't affect the global price. I'd also say, if we were really interested in securing energy supply in the UK and insulating ourselves against these energy price spikes, we'd be investing in home insulation massively in the UK. We're not doing that. We'd also be allowing for onshore wind development. We're not doing that. So this government is not seriously implementing the policies that would benefit both the climate agenda, but also the energy security agenda. So this is really, a lot of window dressing and basically continuing to support the fossil fuel industry in the North Sea.
But we do burn, Aaron, a lot of oil and gas, and we may have to yet source LNG, liquefied natural gas, this winter, and it may be difficult to come by if the Chinese economy takes off again, which we've been warned might push up our energy prices more. I mean, given that there is a long horizon for oil and gas, isn't this the right decision to create some security in the market?
Well, as was just said, this is not going to solve the problems in the short term. This is because these projects won't come online for a decade or more. But the real point is about around the climate crisis, right? This is why this is such an issue. We know that we have to leave the vast majority of fossil fuels unburned if we're to stay within our Paris Agreement targets of staying below 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. That requires the majority of fossil fuels don't get developed of what we already have existing. If we continue to expand and explore for more, that's just guaranteeing that we won't meet those climate targets, or it means that those will become stranded assets, as you say. And this is not a niche position. This is the position of the United Nations Environment Programme, the International Energy Agency, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and so on. Even our own Committee on Climate Change has said we cannot and should not develop these oil and gas reserves if we're to meet our climate targets, and we don't need them to decarbonize. We can replace the energy needs through energy efficiency and clean energy.
Roger, the fossil fuel industry's solution to this is carbon capture, which the government has put an awful lot of money, well, they've put money in as a backstop. I think they're underwriting the investment up to billions of pounds. Why have they agreed to do that today when they were so slow to invest in it before? And does it work?
Well, does it work? To start with. It would be maybe 20 years ago that I traveled to Algeria to take a trip into the middle of the Sahara Desert, where BP had a gas plant where they were bringing up gas from the Sahara, methane, but there was too much carbon dioxide mixed in with the methane, so they couldn't sell it. Now, normally, normally in those circumstances, a gas firm would decide just to vent it into the atmosphere, but that would have made BP the biggest point source of carbon dioxide on the planet. So they decided to put it underground. So basically, where they had pumped out gas, they pumped back in carbon dioxide. Extraordinarily, all that drilling was controlled from a control room in Surrey, where they had this massive walled screen where you could see the drill going underground thousands of miles away in the middle of the Sahara. It was quite extraordinary. But there was one point where you could see the drill coming through like this, and then the substrate dipped down, and the drill kept going, and the drill went out of the reservoir for CO2, and then it went back in again. And I said, what's that? Why have they gone out of the reservoir? He said, oh, well, that's Christmas. We forgot to tell the people to switch the drilling for Christmas. Now, that's just a tiny trivial thing, but it shows that, yes, it can work. If it had held gas in the first place, then it can hold CO2. But also, human error can creep in and things can go wrong. So anyway, that's one.
But how much gas? Because the energy minister was asked this morning specifically, and he said, oh, well, thousands of kilowatt tons. Well, how many thousands? 2,000, 30,000, 100,000? We don't have a measure of that, and yet we are pumping more oil and gas.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I mean, the Carbon Capture and Storage Association have their estimates, but they're very wide, and we are going to pump more oil and gas. Back in 2021, a government, a leading advanced government, asked the International Energy Agency to do a study on whether or not countries should be pumping out new oil and gas. And it came back with a very categorical answer. No, we've already got too much gas and oil in the system, ready to be exploited. We don't need any more. And if we burn it, it will push all the climate targets out of the window. And that country that commissioned that report was the UK. So 2 years later, they're just going completely against that report. And not just, as Aaron said earlier, it's not just the International Energy Agency. I mean, this is a very widespread view held by agencies across the world.
Dr. Nackley, one of the concerns about carbon capture, the critics say it's a sort of neocon greenwashing of the oil and gas that we extract, that people who are in that industry say, don't worry, tech will take care of it, carbon capture will deal with it, you don't need to worry how much we pump. But there's no evidence that it works, is there?
Actually, there is evidence that it does work, but at what cost? And there is a long list of challenges. Mind you, this technology, people talk about it as if we just discovered it recently. This has been around for decades, and the oil and gas industry knows how to do it. But the problem, it comes with a long list of challenges, starting with the cost, the corrosive nature of carbon dioxide, the potential of leakage, the regulatory rules, because carbon dioxide is a waste. It's not a valuable product like oil and gas, for instance. There is no market for it. So we know how to do it as an industry, but sometimes I feel that it is oversold by the industry and by governments that it is the solution. The climate problem is a global problem. It's a big problem, and no single solution, whether it's energy efficiency, by the way, or carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture usage and storage, will solve by itself the climate challenge. We need several solutions, but it would be very simplistic to say that this is a technology that we need to solve the climate problem.
Anish, I want to talk just in the 10 minutes we have left about the government and whether it really is truly committed to this net zero target. There's a story on the front page of the Financial Times today that the government's made it cheaper for industry to pollute in Britain compared with the EU by watering down reforms to the carbon market. So in simple terms, they're giving more allowances than expected to polluting industries, and therefore carbon prices are being traded at a steep discount compared to Europe. Do you think there is enough incentive at the moment for the fossil fuel companies to invest in the alternatives and to clean up their act?
Well, I think the announcement today granting the carbon capture licenses is certainly helpful. My view is that carbon capture will be a large part of the solution of getting to net zero. No, it's not the only solution. But renewables aren't the only solution on their own either. They come with their own problems. So I think that carbon capture, you can produce more oil and gas, or you can offset the emissions from the existing oil and gas. In my view, it's a proven technology. It's been going for a few decades. It's been shown in various countries around the world to work. The UK has got the carbon capture resource, if you like. It's got the reservoirs, plenty of them, that have produced a lot of gas. It's got reservoirs that are able to store carbon dioxide. So, why not take advantage of that that resource we've got?
Yeah. You just in terms of, I mean, let's take, for example, the other side of the argument, your side of the argument, that we do need this oil and gas. You touched on the idea that we need more investment, and because of the tax policies of the government and the debate over net zero, there just isn't that incentive to invest here. Do you think today's decision will perhaps encourage other companies, or do you think these licenses that he's agreeing are in and of themselves enough?
Overall, I don't think that this announcement today is going to stimulate a significant amount of new investment. I think the investment climate for oil and gas in the UK has been pretty poor for the last few years. It's difficult enough to invest to attract money into the oil and gas sector, given the concerns over climate change. And with the tax policies that are in place, the potential for a change in government, which could scrap these, could turn around and change energy policy once again. It's very hard to see new companies coming in on the back of these announcements. On the carbon capture side, I think it's a little bit different. I think there will be new companies looking to invest. There's a lot of money that is going towards carbon capture. And I think that could be a huge growth area for the UK.
Aaron, I know you go to all these conferences where international agreements are negotiated. When they look at the criticism of backsliding that the government's coming in for at the moment, how does that undermine these negotiations at an international level?
Oh, massively. Yeah, no, this is the thing. The UK likes to call itself a climate leader, and that's, we hosted COP26 in Glasgow. But, we're reneging on these pledges, right? And the last month we have just seen, again, like you say, backsliding on these issues in a massive way. James Murray, the editor of Business Greens today, described today's announcement as, a polarizing, populist and post-truth approach straight out of that kind of playbook. And, ultimately what we're seeing is a kind of performative hostility towards environmental issues in order to try and, I guess, position themselves ahead of the next election. And I think it just doesn't fly, because we all know we're in a climate emergency. The public's really concerned about that. The public overwhelmingly supports the net zero agenda. And when you have the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, saying that investing in new oil and gas is moral and economic madness, for the UK Prime Minister to then do that is completely undermining our position at these COP negotiations.
But Dr. Nackley, I called it a wedge issue. It's a wedge issue because a lot of people can't afford the subsidies that they're being asked to pay. I mean, Uxbridge was a very good example of that last week, the by-election, where it is the poorest drivers, those who come into London to find work, who say they're being hit the hardest, and they voted against the policies that the Labour London mayor has put in place. And you talked about this just transition, and I know you're talking about it between poor and rich countries, but it is also felt at a local and national level as well.
Absolutely. I mean, within the UK, I do recall last year the unease and the complaints that people made about their high energy bills, and they were worried about not being able to afford to pay those prices to keep their house warm and to go through the difficult winters. And this is a reality that we have to face. While we all want to save the planet, either we have to accept that we give up on oil and gas. In the UK, oil and gas meets still today 72% of the country's primary energy needs. So you can say, yes, we're not going to provide any more oil and gas in the country. We have to accept high prices. If everybody is happy with these high prices and they are not worried about the spread of energy poverty, as you rightly said, it's not only about the poor versus rich countries, but within the developed countries, within the UK, there has been a rise in energy poverty, especially last year. So if people are not worried about high prices, then fine, we can take this drastic measure and stop oil and gas. But even the International Energy Agency, and I heard both Roger and Aaron referring to what the Energy Agency said in May 2021, that if we were to achieve net zero by 2050, we should not invest anymore in oil and gas. But that same agency, a few months later, October 21, published 2 reports where they said no investment is going to lead, or not sufficient investment in oil and gas is going to lead to higher prices and more volatility in prices. If this is the reality that everybody is happy to take, then fine, we'll all speak with one voice. But unfortunately, we're not all speaking with one voice. The poorer people, the low-income households are not going to accept high prices for energy, no matter how noble the cause is.
Okay, we are out of time. We will have to leave it there. Thank you very much to all of you for your time. That's Roger Harabin, Aaron Thierry, Anish Kapadia and Dr. Carol Nackley. Thank you all for your thoughts this evening.